Joining me now is Yotav Eliach. He's a Middle East expert and author of the new book, Judaism, Zionism, and the Land of Israel. Also with us is Eric Mandel, the director of the Middle East Political Information Network. Thank you both for being with us. And Yotav, let's start with you, because it's believed that this recovery operation, as we discussed, was made possible due to Russia. Russia helped Israel search for the remains of missing soldiers in Syria in September, we know that. And Netanyahu hinted that significant diplomatic efforts were involved here. How much credit do you think he can take for this? How much is due to his relationship with Putin?
I would have to say that there's a variety of factors. I think part of it is his relationship with Putin. Part of it is Israeli intelligence. Part of it is, I would have to say, Israeli assets on the ground in Syria. And you can't take away, I think, also diplomacy, not just directly with Netanyahu, but Netanyahu has set up an international network of relationship with world leaders, which include Putin. And though, as your other reporter mentioned, there are clashes and issues when it comes to Israel hitting Iranian assets in Lebanon and in Syria, but there is no doubt that I believe this personal relationship had something to do with getting Baumel's bounty back to Israel.
Eric, this is yet another diplomatic breakthrough from Netanyahu, and he's had a pretty good 2 weeks. So we had the Brazilian president in Israel going for the first time with the prime minister to the wall. Last week, President Trump recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, a new embassy opening up in Rwanda. It's been a good week from him on a diplomatic breakthrough front. How do you see that boosting him ahead of the elections?
Well, it could only help him. His detractors think this was all staged and timed at this particular point of time. But there's no doubt that the address, if you want to have something done in Syria, Lebanon, or with Iran, is Moscow. It's not the United States. And so his relationship there and cultivating it's been incredibly important for Israeli security going forward, and balancing that relationship because it's more of a transactional relationship as opposed to a value-based relationship with the United States is something that Bibi has been really been very good at.
Is that something, Eric, that Gantz could replicate, do you think?
I don't think, I think that's a big question. I think that's one of the things that goes on. Gantz and Boogie and Gabi Ashkenazi are trying to present a front that says, you don't have to worry about security. We're the guys for you, but you will continue having Israel as a Jewish state, as a democracy, and you can get rid of somebody who's corrupt. Bibi saying that these are all false charges, and he's saying, I am Mr. Security, and people feel comfortable with him. This country has moved to the center right from a center-left country 25 years ago.
And we will discuss that when we come back after the break. Eric, stick around. Yotav, please stay with us as well. And we're back with my panel, Rabbi Yotav Eliach, a Middle East expert and author, and Eric Mandel, the director of the Middle East Political Information Network. Rabbi, Gantz says, as we heard in that piece, that Prime Minister Netanyahu is going to be too distracted fighting these potential corruption and bribery indictments to rule the country effectively. Does he have a point?
I think not. I think Netanyahu has made it clear throughout the last few years and the last few weeks when these indictments became official that he's capable at the same time of doing both things, of being a prime minister and also being someone who would deal with his own legal problems. I'd like to point out that in this entire campaign, Benny Gantz has yet to lay out his plan, how exactly he will govern. He's very careful. He picks his words as if they're meant for focus groups, as if someone is whispering into his ear, don't say this and don't say that. But he doesn't come across as someone who has a very clear vision. The last thing I want to say about Gantz, I happen to have many friends who are high-ranking officers in the IDF, mostly in reserves, but in active duty as well. He is not a revered figure in the IDF. There's been a lot of criticism of him. Obviously, soldiers who are wearing uniforms will not say anything. People in reserves are more open about it. He did not instill confidence or leadership in the minds of the soldiers underneath him. It's like that's a known secret in the IDF.
Eric, does Rabbi Yotav Eliach have a point there that we don't really know much about Gantz's policies because he hasn't really articulated them?
Well, first thing I just wanted to mention was they've only had an intent to indict. He hasn't been indicted yet.
Potentially,
which will up for 6 to 9 months. We don't know. The question really is, how would Benny Gantz deal with the West Bank, annexation, Gaza, Iran. And most people, because he really hasn't articulated a clear vision, other than the fact that he will be honest, he won't be corrupt,
right.
He won't be Bibi, and he will thinks that Israel's democracy is endangered because of the actions Bibi has had against attacking media and journalists and things like that. So Benny Gantz has just not made it that clear yet.
But could that Yotav actually be a plus for him? Because so far he's perceived to be Netanyahu light. So it seems as though he's going to have the same policy. So there wouldn't be a drastic change there. And Gantz has presented himself as Netanyahu without the potential corruption issues or without the taint of corruption hanging over him. And he's also presented himself as a version of Netanyahu that isn't as divisive. Granted, Netanyahu has strong relations with the leaders around the world, but there are also strained relations with some leaders around the world that don't like Netanyahu. So could this lighter version of Bibi actually be an advantage to Gantz?
I don't see that, certainly based on the polls. His numbers keep going down. When he first started, he was the fresh new face, interesting, not Bibi, stellar chief of staff. But his numbers keep going down week after week, and I suspect that between now and the election, the numbers will go down further and further. I don't think Israelis are interested, seem to be, buying this version that he's Bibi light. And I think that's not just that the Likud is doing better. I think the coalition that the right of center is going to be able to put together is going to be close to 70 seats.
Yeah.
So and I just want to say one thing. I don't think Bibi turned the country into center right. The country became center right because the Oslo Accords unfortunately failed the way they did. Almost every Israeli has gone to one funeral in the last 25 years of someone killed by a terrorist, or perhaps themselves have been in a shelter because a rocket has exploded near where they are. The reality has created a center-right country, and Bibi has been the answer to a country that is a center-right political country.
Eric, speaking of the polls, the latest Haaretz poll shows that Likud is in fact widening its margin over blue and white, projected to take 30 seats, Netanyahu, and 27 to Gantz. And the potential coalition that Netanyahu could put together is looking, according to the Haaretz poll, up to 67 seats. Why do you think that blue and white is starting to lose some support now?
I think there is something about the shiny new person. In the beginning was somebody people can write anything they wanted upon, but he hasn't differentiated himself enough of what's going on. Plus, Bibi went on the offensive. When you go on the offensive, you're going to win 90% of the time. He labeled centrists, basically Gantz, Boogie, who's really to the right of Bibi on security issues, as leftists, and so it energized his base. There is a certain group of people, just like in the United States here, that will be against Bibi Netanyahu, but the country has a de facto default, and that is towards security. And I think Bibi, between the international relations, the economy's still doing quite well, and his handling that they haven't gone into a major war with him, going on. I think they still have more trust in him, and so the idea that Israel's going to not be a democracy, I don't think resonates well. I think they need to find something else.
All right, thank you so much, Eric Mandel and Rabbi Yotav Eliach, and of course, we'll continue these conversations over the next couple of days.